I think a lot of people in the Trump camp are going to be shattered because they were told that the military is going to intervene and the white hats and all this stuff and trust the plan. And they sat on their asses for the last year doing nothing while this great reset took over our lives.
Welcome, everyone, to Unsafe Space. I'm your host, Carter Laren, and I'm joined, as usual, by Keri Smith. We are excited today to speak with Kamran Pasha. Kamran is a filmmaker and novelist. He has worked as a writer and producer on TV shows such as Sleeper Cells, Kings, Nikita, Rain in Roswell, New Mexico, and has 2 historical novels published through Simon & Schuster, Mother of the Believers and Shadow of the Swords, which are set in the Middle East. You can follow him on Twitter at Kamran Pasha. That's KamranPasha. And you can go to KamranPasha.com. Kamran, welcome. Thank you for joining us on Unsafe Space today.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be on it. It's an honor for me to be on. I know you've had a lot of really great people on the show before.
Well, you will be more likely banned from any Hollywood activity now that you've been on this show. Although I think you're digging a hole pretty well yourself. So
I've already dug that hole. I dug that hole years ago, and finally I said, you know what? For the longest time, I hid who I was and my beliefs about the world of politics, religion, everything else, and thought that would help me get work in Hollywood. And discovered people just didn't want to hire me anyway. So I said, okay, I'm just going to be honest then. And so
I assume it feels better, to be honest. Yeah.
Well, that's it.
I get DMs all the time from my colleagues in the industry saying, wow, I'm glad you tweeted that. I didn't have the courage to say that. I'm never going to say that, but I'm glad someone did. So,
yeah.
Isn't that amazing? Mm-hmm. So I used to work in entertainment before we started this show, Kamran. I was a entertainment manager, but I managed comedians. Gotcha. And my partner managed musicians. But then I also produced a television show and worked on several other pilots and pitch shows. And when I started, what you just said, started just sort of allowing myself to speak what I believe to be true. I lost a lot of friends. Yeah. I lost a lot of connections. Mm-hmm. But I also started to get these messages from people who were saying, people in the entertainment world who were saying, oh, I really like that you shared that. But I'm too afraid to even hit like.
Oh, I've gotten that message too. I got that message last week saying, I really wanted to support you, but if I hit like, someone might see it, and that might be the end of my career.
I'm like, isn't that crazy?
Days ago.
Yeah. It's. I mean, I understand it. I don't mean to denigrate anyone who is living with that kind of fear. I had that kind of fear myself for a while. Yeah. I understand it, but then when you're on the other side of it, have you found now that you're speaking? Well, first of all, tell us, when did you decide to start speaking your beliefs? And why, and what are some of those beliefs for anyone who's not familiar with you? What are some beliefs that are maybe considered not part of the mainstream these days, or something that is considered unsafe, that a belief that you hold? And what has been your experience? There's a lot of questions in one, but what's been your experience in doing so after you got over that fear?
Sure. Well, for my background, for anyone who just wants to get a little bit about me, Carter explained, I've been working as a filmmaker, novelist. I've been working in traditional Hollywood system, particularly in television, for now, April will be 20 years. And I've worked on network, I've worked on big cable shows, all of that stuff. My personal background is, I'm a Pakistani American Muslim. I was born in Pakistan, came to America when I was 3 years old, grew up in Brooklyn. I'm a conservative, traditional, practicing Muslim. And so that in and of itself has always been unusual in Hollywood, right? When I first got into the industry back in, I first sold my first script in 2001. So, like I said, almost 20 years now. And when I first got into the industry, people would meet me like, wait, you're a Muslim? I've never met one in my 40 years in this industry. And that was 2001. And thankfully, in the last few years, I have not been so alone. But we can talk about why that has happened, because it's interesting, because a certain kind of Muslim is now being sought by the industry for political purposes. The very woke, very, very left, very, let's say, not traditional in their religious beliefs. And that's actually what the industry was hoping I would be, and I wasn't. And when I quickly figured out that people were uncomfortable with me just purely on religion, right? Because for all of Hollywood's leftism, and I think a lot of people on the right say, well, Islam is the religion of Hollywood. I was like, no, it ain't, buddy, because there's two major issues that I presented, which I had to hide and suppress for the longest times about my belief, or at least how I was perceived. One is that Islam in general is seen as a very right-wing religion. It is seen as a homophobic and anti-feminist and anti-woman religion. I would argue that it is not. I'm a Sufi, so I'm very much more moderate on a lot of issues, but I would argue that it's not. But nonetheless, that's its perception in Hollywood. So it's not seen as a woke religion. So it's seen as something that's very against the times and the direction Hollywood wants to go in, number one. Number two is that it is seen. A lot of people in Hollywood are very emotional about issues in the Middle East. There's a lot of very passionate support for Israel, which I understand, and people perceive the Muslims are a threat to that. And so in Hollywood, they're all liberal except when it comes to Middle East. On Middle East, they're like, yeah, I'm pretty right wing, man. I mean, all these guys are a threat to the country that I care about. I get that, but because of that, I'll walk into a room and people, when they discover who I am, two perceptions are thrown at me instantly, and even if I've said nothing, I'm now several steps behind in their estimation of me. And so for many years, I hid any personal beliefs I had, whether they were religious or political, because I want to survive. And I did have, some very early success that got me a lot of attention, which was not necessarily good attention. I had that show Sleeper Cell. I was a producer on that. That was right during the height of the Iraq War, 2005, 2006. And it was about a Muslim FBI agent who fights Al-Qaeda. He infiltrates a terrorist group and defeats them, right? And it's based on real FBI agents and other people that exist. And so I got LA Times, New York Times, and all these like, wow, there's up and coming Muslim writer on this show. And some people are like, oh, this guy, now I know this guy exists. And I thought that was going to explode my career high because we got Golden Globe nominations, Emmy nominations, all that stuff. And I got to go to the Emmy Awards, which was fun. And then what happened, and at the time, it would help me a little bit because there was, George Bush was in power. The war on terror was a standard thing that Hollywood was against, right? And George Bush was the villain. Now he's become a hero. It's very interesting how Hollywood.
Weird. Yes.
He's now a hero.
I've noticed that too.
But at the time, you could imagine George Bush was the Antichrist in Hollywood. And now he's like, hey, man, I love this. He's like, he makes paintings and he stands for justice. I'm like, well, whatever. Okay, so whatever. So that happened. And so I was a little bit feeded at the time in the media as being someone they could use as, well, here, look how Hollywood is standing for all these oppressed Muslims that Bush is killing. Okay. Then Obama got elected and my career just stopped. I was shocked. Literally days after Obama was elected, my phone stopped ringing, all my projects stopped because I was no longer useful for the narrative. Right. Wow. And then I had risen. I worked at NBC, I'd gotten Emmy nominations, and suddenly, and then show upon show started happening with the Muslim villain again. Show upon show with the Muslim villain who's blowing himself up, that it was like, we're going back 20 years in the narrative. And that was intentional because now they got their guy Obama. They're like, now those two issues that I said, well, we don't really like Islam rules. We're going to go back to telling the stories you want to tell, and I'll get rid of this troublemaker. We don't need this guy around. And I had to rebuild my career from that.
Wait, that's so interesting. Let me ask you about that because I want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. So you're saying that the culture in Hollywood under Bush, because they hated Bush so much, they were happy to push a narrative. What was the narrative they were pushing then, and how did it change?
The narrative was Bush is killing all these poor Middle Easterners. And here we've got this Muslim guy that we're going to hold up as our identity politics, image, as our sword for that, right? And so look at him and look at how much oppression is happening under Bush in against people like him, and we're going to advance him to show that. And the moment, well, Obama, hey, Obama's great. Black guy comes in, he had a Muslim father, he spent time in Indonesia. Great, we got everything we wanted, right? He's out saying all the right things. All right, well, screw this Islam stuff. Now, then suddenly all the TV shows were about all the Muslim woman being beaten by her husband, and all the terrorist sleeper cells were everywhere, and it's just like, and they were random shows where there was a show with Katie Heigl on where she was the assistant to the female president, if you remember that, and the whole show was about her fighting this mysterious Middle Eastern group that worshipped the stars, but it was Muslim, and it made no sense, right? It was like, you don't worship stars, but the whole show, I was like, come on, man, this is 2015. I mean, why are you making shows like this, right? Especially because they all know who I was. And I'm going to actually share with you one story. And forgive me, I'm just rambling on.
Please. This is interesting.
Carter, Keri, I got a flood, right? So, but this is to answer your original question. When did I start speaking up? It's the moment that I knew that there was nothing I could do. That there was, I mean, I suspected when my career started to slow down, right? I worked on the show Kings, which got a lot of critical acclaim, whatever, and then it was hard to get work after that. And I was like, what's happening? It was right, Kings ended right at, or was premiered right when Obama was elected. And I was like, what's happening here? And so at that time, several major shows, and I won't name them, but I think you can guess, major shows were coming out with the CIA fighting the Muslim villains, right? A lot of those shows were, and you can figure those out. And one of the creators of those shows had been very friendly to me during the Bush era. We would hang out, we would go, have coffee, and it's like, I'm going to hire you someday. Well, nowadays, like he's got several shows on that seem to at least be dealing with the Middle East and whatever, and he was getting, and they were very traditional, stereotypical Muslim villain with no agenda or an incorrect agenda. And he was getting a lot of bad PR. I mean, there was still people in the press going, well, what is, there's a lot of inaccuracy and all that stuff, Islamophobia. And so this came directly from a friend of mine who's a major producer. He called me, said, can we go out to coffee? I need to talk to you. And I said, sure. So we'll talk. He's like, and he was a white guy producer, right? And he said, I had an incident that shocked me, and I need to relay it to you because I don't know how to process it. So he's working with this top showrunner who I know, who for some reason never has been calling me. Like all these shows are going, and my agents can't even get a meeting with me anymore. Shows that are dealing with stuff that I know a lot about, right? I can't even get in the room with him again. I said, okay. He said, well, so he was complaining about the bad PR and the bad press he was getting, and he was frustrated. And so my friend said, well, Kamran Pasha. I know you know him. We worked with him. He's great, and he can come in and fix any inaccuracies on your show so you stop getting all this bad press. And he said to him directly, thinking he was going to stay in the bubble of the Hollywood people in power, right? And he said, I'm never going to hire Kamran. He's not going to go along with the narrative we need to tell.
Wow.
And so he said that thinking he was going to stay in the bubble. But it didn't stay in the bubble because my friend who was living like la la land of like, there's no racism or bigotry or Islamophobia in Hollywood. We're all liberals. Was so shocked and so, shaken by that. He said, I got to talk to you. So he went and I said, yeah, that fits the rumors that I heard that I could never get a meeting because they just didn't want my perspective on the show. But now I was like, well, this guy told it to him directly. He's like, I know Kamran. I know Cameron's great for the show and I know he's going to fix it. And I don't want him to fix it.
Yeah.
Because I have an agenda of what I say about the Middle East, and this guy's going to come in and he's going to say that boss, that's not how it works. Boss, that's not accurate. That character wouldn't do that. And I know the character wouldn't do that. I know it, but I need to believe that because I have the power to change people's minds about things I care about.
So it turns out they don't actually care about bombing children in Pakistan or anywhere else in the Middle East. They really only care about their political agenda, and they will use those children as fodder for their political campaigns. And as soon as Obama, who I think bombed a lot more than Bush did.
Oh, yeah. He overthrew more Muslim countries than Bush did. He overthrew Libya, he overthrew Syria, bombed Pakistan more than Bush did. He started the war in Yemen. I mean, Bush destroyed one country. This dude destroyed 5 or 6 and created billions of refugees. And he's a hero.
He has a peace prize.
Nobel Peace.
Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing? Because I was ensconced in the social justice left bubble. And you better believe, Kamran, I hated Bush. You're talking about how people hated him. He was enemy number one. It fueled me the way that I've noticed Trump hatred fuels a lot of my former friends the past 4 years. And, I was at every protest. I paid attention to everything he did. I wrote letters to his administration. I joined a running club in Los Angeles that was just for people to run in Bush, how they hated Bush shirts.
Spread the message for as people are okay.
Yeah, while we're running. It was called Run Against Bush. Like I was all up in this guy's business and everything he did that I thought was wrong. He sold us a war in Iraq that was illegitimate. I was all over it. And then when Obama got in, who I voted for twice, and who I like.
I voted for him.
You voted for once. You're like my friend who figured things out. When you're mentioning him bombing Libya, Syria, Yemen, all these places, that's sort of my friend Gus, who's been on our show before. He voted for Obama the first time, and he continued to pay attention to things. I didn't. I'm like the mass of people.
You got your guy. He looks great.
I got my guy. And I wasn't even really. I don't think I was really even aware of all the bombings that were happening of all the interventions in the Middle East. But it sounds like to me that what you're sort of saying is that the narrative changed because then the guy that they liked, the guy that the tribe in Hollywood liked, and that I liked, because he was sort of going in and becoming, he was an interventionist in these Middle East countries, that then the narrative about Muslims themselves changed in entertainment.
Right. They had to support that new narrative, right? And that's why Hollywood had to now switch it with more villainous characters. There were shows that were clearly, that had villains that were clearly meant to be Bashar al-Assad, right? Because they were trying to get troops on the ground in Syria, right? They wanted a ground invasion of the scale of Iraq. Instead, we sent some special forces and CIA guys, and that was enough to destroy the country, right? That was enough, right? We didn't need an Iraq scale invasion. Obama's like, yeah, let's just keep it simple and get it done, and he did, right? But that was when the narrative changed, because that's the system. I'm going to be careful what I say here, because I know more than I can actually say publicly. But there's a great book called The CIA in Hollywood, which is a wonderful book written by a professor, I believe it's a scholar at the University of Texas, I believe. And it's just a looking back at the history of intelligence agencies influencing content to influence the masses for foreign policy purposes, and goes back to the OSS. It goes back to, people, there was stuff going on in Casablanca, right? To try to get people to get in, because Casablanca was filmed before we were in the war. and it's a great movie, but part of it is like, we got to get Americans riled up, right? And so it's a wonderful book. I know a little bit more about that topic because of the worlds that I've been in on Sleeper Cell and just my own journey. But there's some stuff that is probably like, you just don't want those guys noticing you by talking about it out loud. Like, oh, you mentioned allowed, yeah. So just go read that book, and I can just say that from personal experience, I know that book is true.
That's fascinating. We just read. We have an Unsafe Space book club. We should add this book to it. I would love to read it. We just read a book by Max Blumenthal that was called the what was it, Carter? I'm blanking on the name. The Management of Savagery, which was it was about all of, U.S. interventions in all these other countries, and there was a short part in the book about I think it was the movie Rambo 2 or 3, and
the third one,
Rambo, the third one where he's with
Mujahideen. Yes,
and just about exactly what you're talking about. And I would like to read more about that, about the CIA involvement in entertainment and influencing our perceptions in the culture.
Something that's odd about that, though, is whenever you bring it up, you get accused of being a conspiracy theorist and a crazy person, and yet there are decades of documented evidence and admission that this is exactly what they do, not only inside the country, but outside the country. This is, they were responsible for the Iranian Revolution. You get, Operation Mockingbird, I don't think was ever really officially shut down, or no one has really verified that it's been shut down. I mean, they have time and time again.
They're still doing MK Ultra, man. Nothing ever gets shut down.
Yeah, but it's weird because, like, you can show someone evidence and you're like, well, these are the things the CIA did in the 50s. Okay. These are the things the CIA did in the 60s. They kept doing them. They did them in the 70s. They did it in the 80s. They did it in the 90s. They did it in 2000. They did it in 2010s. And now if you say, I think they're still doing them, everyone is, you're a crazy conspiracy theorist. How dare you think that? Of course they don't do that anymore.
The great thing about the book that I referenced, The CIA in Hollywood, it's an academic scholar who's looking at those publicly available sources, right? It's not someone talking about people being reptilians beneath their face, whatever. It's not. It's just something else. This is the stuff they've said publicly. This is what I, as a scholar, have researched, right, about the actual known influence of intelligence agencies on Hollywood content, and that's why it's such a great book. And the horrible things, like I said, there's certain things I cannot reveal about my personal interactions with some of these people, but it's just like when you hear, and I'm sitting there like biting my tongue, like, yeah, conspiracy theory, man. I've met these people, right? I'm just gonna keep my, and you're like, okay, and then you're sitting there because you're like, you can't say everything, and you're like, you have to swallow the humiliation of people think you're crazy because you can't actually reveal everything if you want to not have your car explode, right? And so you're like, all right, so just what it is, right?
Yeah. Well, so to get back to that point, when you realize after that conversation with your friend and hearing about the showrunner who said, I can't hire him, he won't push the narrative that I want. And is that was the point at which you felt, I'm just going to be myself and say what I thought.
It was over. I mean, thankfully, I had a career. I mean, look, even after sort of, I went through a several-year period when Obama was elected where I was just like, what just happened? I was doing great. And now I'm like, everyone knows I'm there. I've risen to the mid-level producer. There's all these opportunities, and nobody wants to meet with me. It was frustrating my agents. They couldn't figure it out, or maybe they didn't want to tell me what the real reason was. But I eventually got my career going, and it was interesting because then I could get my career back in places where you didn't really deal with the stuff that I'm an expert in, right? I could do wonderful shows like Reign, which is about Mary Queen of Scots, and I write historical novels, and that's fun, right? And everyone was safe, like I can do Roswell, which is about science fiction and aliens, which I love, right? But everyone was safe to let me be in that area, and the industry's like, all right, as long as the guy's doing that, nobody's paying attention to him, right? And so I was like, all right, whatever. I'm then I'm just going to talk about what I want to talk about, right? Because you've already said you don't want to hire me, not because I'm not good. It's because I am good and I'm a troublemaker. And that's with me hiding my beliefs, with me going on and going, yeah, boss, whatever. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, you're right, boss. With me saying all that, you still don't want to hire me. So I'm like, all right, well, then whatever. Then I'm just going to say what I have to say. And the result has been a lot of people are like, well, I'm really glad I didn't hire him. Well, that's done, right? Number two, but it's also what it's done. It's actually allowed me to develop real relationships. Like, I have real friends now who I can be honest with. And like I said, there's even in the industry while I do believe there's people that really despise me, maybe I'm sure I've been a jerk in situations that have earned that, but I think sometimes just being despised because of the person that you are, right? There are also these people that even if they're not publicly and willing to say anything are like, this guy's got guts. I actually believe what he says, but I ain't going to put myself on the line for it. And those are people that will hopefully be partners in my journey moving forward, even if they can't publicly ever associate themselves with me.
Right. Or they can't do so yet.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times those people who, at least in my case, some of those people who reach out privately and are supportive privately, but too afraid to be so publicly.
Yeah.
Some of them are still that way, but others have made movement. They've made movement in conquering their own fear.
Yeah.
And so you never know where those people, how you're inspiring them by just, oh my gosh, imagine that, having the courage to just say what you think.
One of the people that I've actually come to admire and I've finally begun to develop like communication with her is the actress Gina Carano, right? Because she's out there and she was putting herself out there at the worst, at the height of when you can't say anything about that pandemic, you can't say anything about nothing, right? And she has everything to lose because she's on Star Wars, right? And I was blown away by her guts. And she's not out there. She's never saying, I support Trump. She just says certain philosophical beliefs, which are to me self-evidently true, which are now controversial. And and she's been attacked horrifically, but what's amazing is she's become more popular as a result. I think she's the number 2 rated most popular figure on IMDb. That's how much people search for her IMDb, right?
Wow.
Out of 1 million people on that thing, she's number 2 on it. And she rose to that this year. She was like an unknown figure before that. But it's just by being honest, she became massively popular. And as a result, she's protected because Disney's like, yeah, say what, use your common sense, but say what you got to say. Disney's letting her do it.
That's amazing. See, that's inspiring because I think that shows sometimes all these people we're talking about who are living in fear. I had a friend who has a very popular channel on YouTube a few years ago come out to me and say, and they do scripted stuff. And he was like, he and his partner are both libertarians. Mm-hmm. They're closet libertarians. That's how closed down the echo chamber is in Los Angeles. Is that I was shocked. I was like, if you were a closet conservative, which I've met some of those too, but you're not even a conservative. You're a libertarian, and you're afraid to say that.
A lot of issues like because I'm a libertarian. There's a lot of issues like okay, well, you support gay rights. You support gay marriage. You support all these freedom because you believe in personal freedom. You support all these things. You support the right for people using recreational, narcotics or whatever. You support all these things. It's like you would think Hollywood is like, oh, but you support like freedom of trade and the willingness to not be part of a union. Oh, you're done.
Yeah. But what I was trying to tell my friend was that at the time, because they were having an issue where a lot of the writers they had hired were, I would say, ideologically social justice, my old belief system. Sure. And they were feeling like their own company and their own content was becoming SJW, even though that wasn't their belief system. And they felt kind of powerless to change it. And they wanted to bring on writers of different ideological beliefs, but were were being held hostage by their own fear about what that would mean. And what I said to them then, I'm glad you told me about Gina Carano being, so popular on IMDb. I didn't know that. I really said, like, yes, if you start introducing, if you have writers and you have content with a different ideological perspective, yes, you're going to lose, you're going to take a hit, and you might be attacked and you might lose some viewers. But I truly believe you will gain viewers over the long haul.
Because let's be honest here, and no disrespect to your SJW past and your current colleagues, like most people ain't that, right? And most of the audience isn't that. That's not the marketplace. And setting anything about Trump and Biden aside, that's just not the marketplace. And Star Wars began to figure that out because they went through that exact process where Lucasfilm was filled with all these characters and wouldn't let in any kind of common sense storytelling. It all had to be this weirdo, post-Marxist, strange stuff, right? That people don't think like.
Yeah, but you're right. The audience perseveres, and they tell you what they want, despite all the programming and despite all of the lecturing, the hectoring, and the trying to almost talk down to the audience and say we are intellectual, moral, superior.
We're trying
superiors to you. We're trying to evolve you.
Yeah.
Great. I'm sorry I talked over you for that, because that's great. That's the attitude. Is they're trying to evolve you. Despite all of that, all you have to do is go to Rotten Tomatoes and look at the difference between the critics' ratings and the audience ratings.
Or even the ones that they're willing to admit, because now Rotten Tomatoes has this fake audience rating, which is the verified users, which is like, right? And then the actual ones, you have to click another tab to see the actual one, which is everybody. So it's the verified users versus, and so now, like, for example, the Wonder Woman 1984, I love the first Wonder Woman. I hated the second one. And so the verified users is like 70% positive. And that's like, a couple of thousand reviews. And then you go to all users, you have to find the tab in all users. It's like 100,000 people with like, 30% positive. But the verified users, the blue checks, are the ones that are being promoted.
That's amazing. Of course they've adjusted for this. I didn't know they had done that, by the way.
I didn't know that. I thought that user rating doesn't feel right because it's a bad movie, man. And then someone said, "Oh, press that tab over there." And I pressed the tab. I was like, "Oh, okay, wait, that's everybody else? That's 100,000 people. This is 2,000 people."
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Just to let it's not limited to the southern half of the state. I've been in Silicon Valley for 20 years, and the exact same thing happens with founders and executives and engineers and other people coming to me saying, I can't say it, but I agree, or I'm afraid to speak my mind at Google, or I'm afraid to speak my mind anywhere. It's the entire community. And the question I have for you is, I don't think Silicon Valley is savable. I think I think it's done. It's in its death throes. Most of the, a lot, not most, but a lot of the successful people are leaving California. You have other hubs of creative technical activity in the world. You've got a much more interconnected world, so you don't need to be sitting next to Stanford to get good engineers anymore. You can be somewhere other than Palo Alto. And my question for you is Hollywood done in that sense? Is it going to be, obviously tech innovation isn't done. It just isn't going to happen in Silicon Valley in the future, and it will be elsewhere. Is Hollywood done in that sense, or is Hollywood salvageable from an ideological perspective?
Well, I think it'll be interesting because there's been tumult in the last year. Hollywood was beginning to get back on track away from the SJW nonsense, right? And that was seen in the changes in Lucasfilm with Star Wars. Because when I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and happy to talk more about that. And then I was shocked at the direction this new Disney trilogy went in, particularly The Last Jedi. I was like, what is this? And The Last Jedi in particular, I was horrified because I was like watching all the nihilism and weirdo ideas that I've been fighting in writers' rooms, from like the weirdo in the corner who would say crazy things, had now become like the dominant narrative and was in that movie, right? And so I was like, oh God, the narrative has taken over Star Wars. And the audience reacted very badly to it. And Disney figured out that it wasn't making them money. And so they started course shifting. They started getting rid of the SJW nonsense from Star Wars. They brought in Jon Favreau to put The Mandalorian on a better track and a more authentic track. And the problem became this, right? The problem became, that was the end. That was like 2019. By the end of 2019, Disney was very much, everyone shut up about their politics and give the customer what it wants. That's where they were, right? And I've worked at Disney in the past. I wrote their Tron animated series, right? So I've had some interesting experiences there. So, but then 2020 happened, and all the events of 2020 happened, and particularly the events of the summer. We've talked about the biggest event is obviously the virus and the lockdowns.
Right.
And I personally think they're linked. The event of the most emotionally painful events were the rioting over the summer, right? BLM and Antifa and those issues and what happened with Mr. Floyd and all of that.
The summer of 2020 is when I consider that's when my old ideology went mainstream. That's when it became culturally dominant. It entered a new phase.
It became pushed by the mainstream media. I still do not believe it is mainstream in people's hearts. I think that
I agree. Actually.
But it became the official thing, and that's the problem, is that the Hollywood was getting to a place where they had figured out that the woke movies weren't selling. They'd figured it out from the Ghostbusters reboot that didn't work, right? Again, they woke ideology over good writing. Great to have Ghostbusters with all women, but why don't you give them a good script, right? That wasn't part of it. You have Asian women in Star Wars. Well, why'd you write a bad role for her, right? I mean, whatever. So that, and we can talk about the actual hidden racism of the woke, right? Which is what it's about. But now suddenly Hollywood is back on track. Terminator: Dark Fate, which wasn't a woke movie, but it was marketed as woke, didn't do well. Then Charlie's Angels, which wasn't a woke movie, was marketed as this is and nobody went to see the feminist marketing of the movie. And the same thing happened with Birds of Prey, right? Again, not a particularly woke movie, marketed as woke, thinking they're going to get the young Twitter crowd, and everybody else said, well, I don't want to watch this. So Hollywood figured out, okay, that's not making us money. Let's get back on track. And then the events of 2020 happened. And BLM became sort of the Christ figure on the cross in 2020. And now suddenly it was the new icon. And Hollywood was like, oh my God, we got to go back to saying this stuff. Otherwise, we're going to be lambasted by the press. Even though we know now it doesn't work. We know the audience doesn't want it. But we got to survive this period where we're going to be attacked as crazy Trump racist fanatics if we just don't play along. Before, they were trapped into bad ideology and not knowing its outcome. Now they know its outcome. And they're now forced to go along with something they don't want to do anymore. So we'll see who knows how the hell rest of this year is going to play out. It's already been crazy in the first 7 days, right? I know people want to return to normal. The other added problem is the lockdowns have destroyed the industry. And so people have privately said to me, man, I wish we could just go back to normal and just have normal people on sets behaving normally, because it's very hard to do proper work when you got to keep this distance, you can't do this, you got to wear mask. It's very hard under the current restrictions that the unions have said we need to do for safety. And everyone's like, this isn't really working and we're not able to make a show. But I don't want to be seen as an anti-mask, anti-lockdown fascist. So I'm just going to let this thing die because I don't want to be hassled on Twitter like Cameron, right? And so the industry is now trapped. And the pivotal thing is what's going to happen with this Gavin Newsom recall, because I know there's a lot of people privately in Hollywood that hate Newsom. They voted him in and now they hate him because he's messing with their money, right? He's messing with their money. And so I know Iger hates him. Iger stepped off of his task force, right? And so if you have Bob Iger as a secret enemy, I don't know how much longer Newsom's going to survive. But again, they have to remove these people who are an obstacle to their money quietly, or they're going to be labeled as Trump fascists. So
it's
that's
interesting you use the term fascist to describe anti-maskers, because that's anti-fascist. It's the mask mandates that are fascist, just to be technically clear.
I fully agree. I mean, I've received so much garbage. I've lost friends because I'm like, look, man, I will play along with, like I said, I'm libertarian. I'll play along with the private business. My Vaughn says I got to wear a mask to go inside. I'll play along with that, right? But I ain't going to wear it in the park. I live across Palisades Park, right by the beach. And the very first day the LA mask mandate was put on, I take care of my mother. She lives with me. And the very first day the mask mandate was on, like April or whatever, I take her for a walk every day in the park, right? And we went there, and the very first day the mask mandate on, I was like, 90% of people weren't doing it. Right now, everyone is doing it. And we walked through and there was one gentleman sitting there in a park bench who then, as we walked by him, he was wearing a mask. He then took off his mask and coughed on us. That kind of nonsense, right? And I was like, okay, that's weird behavior. And then we walked by him, just ignored him. And then he started shouting. And this is clearly how should I say it? It's very clear from his demeanor and the things that he said that he was one of these SJW leftists, right? And yet this is what he said as my mom and I walked by him. He's like, you effing, foreigners, you're going to kill me. You effing
Because
foreigners
social
are going to
justice
kill me.
warriors are actually
then,
just racists with better language.
of course they are. Of course they are. And you effing foreigners are going to kill me. Go back to your country. I've lived here since I was 3 years old. I came to America when I was 1976. Gerald Ford was president. And you're telling me I'm an effing foreigner, right? I've never heard that to my face. And this liberal dude in Santa Monica is screaming this at me. And he then followed us for 2 blocks in the park, shouting racist slurs.
What a psychopath.
And this is day one.
What a psychopath.
Psychopath. This is day one of the mask mandate. And I turned and I found him because I'm with my mother. I don't want to create a fight, right? But I'm with my mother and she's getting very unhappy and concerned. What's happening here, right? And she won't wear this mask. She's like, I worked in a hospital 40 years. I know what this is about. It's all crap. But I finally turned to the guy in public. There's all these people staring in the park. They don't know what to do, right? I finally turned. I said, what about the people? And I said to him, there was a white couple having picnic right next to where he was standing without masks. I said, what about them? He said, well, don't you have a problem with them not wearing masks? He said, shut up. I'm talking to you, you effing foreigner.
Okay, this is a good
the woke.
This is a good transition to come back to something you said we could talk about.
Yes.
You said the hidden racism of the woke.
Oh.
I would like to talk about that a little bit with you because it's something I've been thinking a lot about since the ideology went corporate. Let's just say went corporate in the summer of 2020. And since white fragility, I think was written in 2011, but now it's hugely popular now and soaring off the shelves. And in reading, I don't know if you've read that book. She's Robin DiAngelo. She's kind of one of the high priestesses of the woke. But in the book, she confesses to having racist thoughts. She's a white woman who has racist thoughts and beliefs. And she gives an illustration of going to a picnic and having this fear that she was going to have to sit with the black people. And I remember reading.
Honest.
Yeah, being honest. But I remember reading that, and it made me think about how, also anecdotally, just personally, hearing stories about, like from a friend who's Latino, how some of the woke white people in his life were the only people in childhood who ever said racist crap to him. But now they're the woke ones. And I just started thinking about that. I'm like, I think there's something very attractive about wokeness for white people who do have racist beliefs and who do have prejudice, because I think it's in some ways it absolves them of the personal responsibility for having those biased beliefs, those racially biased beliefs, because then they get to say, oh, we all have it, people.
And it's also paternalism. It's paternalism. We superior white people will help you lower inferior, dark, brown, whatever people, right? And because you cannot do it yourself. And, I'm a big follower of Malcolm X. I think Malcolm X is very misunderstood by a lot of people, both on the right and the left, right? And Malcolm X was actually quite conservative. And he was a religious guy. He was traditional. He and MLK disagreed a lot more than, whether you should be able to defend yourself or not. It was more philosophical than that. But Malcolm X, he was very open. I've watched videos of him in 1961, where he said the biggest threat is not the white conservative. The biggest threat to the black community is the white liberal, because he said they are foxes pretending to be our friends. And their goal is to keep the master-slave relationship, but to do it, you can come out of the field and be in the house and wear the costume I give you, right? And he was very clear about that. He said these people want to destroy the black community, and they do it with a smile. And he said that in 1961, and he was right, because I'm witnessing everything you're talking about here. This is the sense of superiority, the sense of these minorities can't think for themselves. They don't have the necessary skills to ever be at our level. And so we're going to give them whatever, handout. But the problem becomes, and I've experienced this personally, setting aside my religious or political beliefs, I'm a Pakistani dude, and I'm usually the one random dude in the room in Hollywood, right, with all the white liberals, right, who hated Bush and now love Bush, right? And early on in my career, I discovered something. Now, this is going to be self-aggrandizing, because I'm going to aggrandize myself because nobody's aggrandizing me, right? So I'll do it, right? I discovered that this stuff was very easy for me. The very first movie that I wrote, that I sold to Warner Brothers, I sold I wrote it in 4 days and I sold that draft, right? And I'm actually an incredibly fast writer, and the script that I wrote.
That's awesome. I will aggrandize you.
Yeah. Okay. So again, nobody's that movie hasn't come out yet. I've told it to Warner Brothers, right? So I discovered this was very, people say Aaron Sorkin can write in 4 days, and David Kelly can do it. You can't. I'm like, yeah, but I can. And the script that I wrote for Sleeper Cell that was submitted for an Emmy by Showtime for best writing was written in 24 hours. I just stayed up all night, wrote the whole script. We pretty much shot that, right? So I discovered very quickly I had an unusual ability and certainly an unusual speed. And when people early on figured out the brown guy can do that, it became a really big problem in the room. Suddenly, when people would see my scripts, they suddenly became, yeah, okay, why don't you go sit back there in the corner, right? Because then it became threatening. Before, they thought they hired me because they were being woke. We have our guy in the corner, and now he's better than me. That shatters the paradigm of I got to help. Look, this guy's actually a threat. And that's what my friend, that conversation I said about that showrunner, my friend said, he's threatened by you, right? He said he couldn't go to all the places of this guy's an anti-Muslim bigot or whatever. He wasn't able to process that. But he said from a pure thing, he's threatened by you because he knows you're going to come in and you're going to take over the narrative of the show because you're a better writer. That's how he framed it, right? And I knew there was something deeper than that, right? And I said, well, yeah, I mean, that's true. But I generally try not to outshine the boss. But if the boss has pathologies, there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah, you're supposed to be the token and sit in the corner. They hired you to be the token, and you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Well,
so they can feel good. I mean, that really, that says it all, because it's like, it's this sort of feeling good about themselves, that they are superior white people, and that they are.
There's a sanctimony.
Yeah, and that they're being benevolent.
Yeah. And just as we think about the tumultuous political times that we're in right now, revolutions generally have been, they succeed because of the support of the elite establishment, not because of a population rising up, but it is those elites that change the country. If you look at the Russian Revolution in 1917, it wasn't the proletariat that rose up. It was the liberal elites, basically, who wanted.
Where did Lenin get all this money? Where did Mao? I mean, I worked in China and I saw what the CCP did to that. I worked there 5 years ago. I couldn't believe that was 5 years ago. And the CCP was so horrific, right? The Chinese were oppressed. I was like, where the hell did Mao get all this money for this revolution? Right. He basically overthrew an existing government of 1 billion people. Rich people
Absolutely.
are financing
and
that.
Actually, Xi has, not to get on the China bandwagon, but Deng Xiaoping came in, opened it up. And people thought China was going to be moving in a direction of more liberty, and Xi has gone. Xi is like the mini Mao, and it's the same thing. And it's this kind of oligarchical authoritarianism where there's very tight connections between the CCP and.
Well, but and I'm going to give an example from China to show the direction that we face in America, the fear that I have. That there's so I worked there like 5 years ago. I was brought in. It was actually right after I worked on the show Nikita. They Chinese producers who actually studied at UCLA. They're Chinese, but they studied UCLA and were fluent in English. And they contacted me and said, we'd like you to come and develop sort of a web series, so their equivalent of their YouTube, right? On that about a female Chinese spy. And I flew there and worked in Beijing for several weeks. I worked with translators, and I basically worked with the Chinese writers and came up with a storyline for the whole series, right? And I learned a lot. One of the things I learned is that it had never been done before. The Chinese government had never allowed a spy show of any kind in China because there's no espionage in the Great People's Republic because they got it all locked down, right? And so every script had to be reviewed by the Chinese government, right? And so we couldn't make it about actual espionage. It had to be corporate espionage, which they were okay with, right? But actually making military government espionage, no. So all that, but what I, on a personal level, what I witnessed was this surprised me, and now it's changed. The situation with the Uyghurs that we're now all talking about, the Uyghurs had always had a tense relationship with the Chinese central government, and it was tense when I was there. But there were Uyghur restaurants in Beijing that were very popular that I would go to, but Beijing has some great food. And what shocked me as a Muslim was there are general halal restaurants, there are sort of Islamic, like kosher halal restaurants, are all over Beijing because there's a very large native Muslim population that goes back 1,300 years in China. And there's a large in Beijing, right? And so I was surprised. So every block I go to, there was a halal restaurant. And that was delighted me, right? But now what's happened under Xi, what's happened is not only has he been destroying the Uyghurs, right, in the last several years, he has now actually in the last year been cracking down on the generally very passive Chinese Hui Muslims who generally just go along with the government, don't bother, just want to keep quiet. And so now all the halal signs are being taken off of restaurants in Beijing because you don't want to acknowledge. But I was like, these guys aren't even causing you any revolutionary trouble. They're just quiet Hui Muslims selling restaurant food, right? But you got to take the halal off because new Chinese government policy. You know, we don't want people to know they're Muslims. Yeah. It's like that's where it's
well, just like you had Mao Zedong thought
Okay.
in universities, you now have universities in China with Xi Jinping thought. So like he's very aware that I think what he's trying to do is solidify power for obviously himself, but also the Chinese Communist Party. And I think he's very aware of the importance of cultural wars there, because he's going after Christians as well. I'm an atheist, so it does, I'm not personally invested in either one, but he is.
Yeah, the Christians are being terribly attacked. When I was there, what was interesting was I went to all the old temples. There's an old mosque there that's 1,000 years old. I went to all of them. What fascinated me, all the different religious sites were filled with young people that were hungry and desperate. There were people coming in front of me and going up to the Taoist priest or the imam and asking, why do you believe this? And they were trying to understand this because they were so burned out of materialism that's been fed down. They don't have anything except you got to have a nice new car. And they were going to all these spiritual places to learn something. And now he's cracking down on all of it.
Yep. Because the state is God.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're saying they're burned out on materialism and nihilism, I would add to that. And that's when people start searching for meaning. So I actually kind of think that a lot of what's happening culturally in places like China and may eventually happen here with this very anti-faith crackdown, whether it's anti-Jewish or Christian or anti-Muslim. I think that
it's anti-religion right now. I mean,
anti-religion. Yeah,
lockdowns were very clear. You can have the liquor store open, but you got to.
As an atheist, I want to throw something out. I think it's anti-values. It's anti-philosophy. It's pure nihilism.
It is that. It's also. I will add one thing that is specific, which is that the faith community is about getting people in a physically together. Yes. And they didn't want that. So that's why they were closing the house of worship. People were saying, the governor's saying, you can pray at home. I'm like, hey, let me tell you something. As a Muslim in Islam, you got to go to the Friday prayers. If you don't miss Friday prayers 3 times in a row, you're considered to have essentially left the community, right? And Islamic tradition is actually very passive. Like I said, the way to Chinese Muslim, like the government do whatever it wants to leave us alone. It's very passive. It's actually, despite all the perception of our threat, the central rule of Muslims is that you obey the government of the country you're in. You do not rebel. The only exception in Islamic law traditionally of when you could rebel against the government, even if it was oppressive, you got to just go along with it, right? Is if they shut down the mosque. Then it's like if they tax you too much, if they limit your freedom, they do this. But if they let you pray in the mosque, no problem. Just shut up and go along with it. If you shut down the mosque, then you have a right to rebel. And yes. That's what they did this last year, right? And my Muslim friends were now very woke, like, oh, brother, the people were arguing to me. Muslims were arguing like, no, the mosque, it's going to spread this disease. But I was like, what about the liquor stores? Like, well, alcoholism is a disease and people need their alcohol. And I was like, they're going to die if they don't have their alcohol. So as a Muslim, we have to have compassion. I was like, so you don't think going to a house of worship in community is actually going to raise people's consciences, may even create some kind of spiritual shield against illnesses, but you think people getting their drink is gonna solve the hole in their heart?
Staving off the shakes is very important.
That's when you've been misled so far, I think, where you don't even realize what you're worshiping anymore. But you're not even aware of what it is you're saying. What do you have faith in? Do you have faith in the mosque or in the church or in the temple? Or do you have faith in the bottle?
And this is the thing. You've hit such a profound thing, which I think 2020 revealed. A lot of people, the faith is they just want to fit in, man. They have faith in just belonging, and that's it. And they don't want the drama of what I'm going through. They don't want the drama of being personally attacked. I've lost a lot of friends. A lot of people have unfriended me. A lot of people that I were close to don't want to talk to me. And this is not just in Hollywood. It is in Hollywood, but also in my own community. Because anyone follows my Twitter feeds knows as a libertarian, I got a lot of criticisms of Trump, but I got a lot more criticism of the other side, right? Because it's like, this is where their guys are going. And just those criticisms were enough to have lot of my old Muslim friends say, brother, I think you've been misled by this evil Trump demagogue, and they're unfriending me, and it's breaking my heart because I was like, man, I'm just trying to keep to my values. You're just going with whatever's going to make you feel comfortable, so you don't get fired from your job. You don't get hassled online. Where's your integrity there?
Where's your integrity? But this is something that's happening in the Christian world too, is that Christianity is getting progressively more woke. Yeah. And I'm a pretty new Christian, so it was shocking to me to find my old religion, wokeness, SJW beliefs, which I do consider a kind of faith. Yeah. It was weird to me to find it in some churches, and thankfully I go to a church that is not woke now, but I tried out a few different places, and I'm very aware of how it's infiltrating the church now. Something you said that I would love to ask you about, because we haven't talked about this with anyone. How is wokeness infecting Islam? I didn't even realize it was.
It's affecting Islam in the United States, which shocked me. It's not affecting it as much. There's actually a benefit to European racism. When I've studied in Britain, I've worked in France, and they are very openly anti-Muslim there. For all their talk of like the French everyone's French except, well, screw you guys, right? And the same thing in Britain, right? Whereas America is actually been like, I actually haven't even after 9/11, I didn't really experience any bigotry, because Americans, they might be ignorant, but they're not inherently hostile. And they will, oh, I didn't know that about you. Oh, you're actually cool. Your religion doesn't really suck. Okay. And then they're open to it. Whereas Britain's like, oh, I know everything about Islam and I hate you guys, right? That's why we colonized you. And so Europe has disconnected its Muslim population, which is very dangerous, because it's becoming this growing population, which they don't want in power. They don't want him. And so that has actually created a benefit, because as a result, the woke crap hasn't gotten into them, right? If you're like, well, I'm already being treated poorly by my professor, in school, so I'm not going to listen to everything he has to say because he's already been racist to me, right? Whereas in America, the worst thing is that the woke glommed onto Islam as this thing. Like you saw when Trump was elected, suddenly saw all these posters of the headscarf became the sign of rebellion.
Yes. And
it's just like, and I was just, during Obama, all these TV shows were like about the Muslim woman, let me take off my headscarf and find my freedom. My poor husband's beating me to wear it, right? And now it's like the sign of freedom, right? And because Muslims have felt so, even though we haven't felt the bigotry that we feel in Europe, we're still a weirdo minority here, and we're scared because after 9/11, you're scared. You're living in a world where you think everyone thinks you're out to get you, which in America they really aren't. But you feel that. And so suddenly you have somebody actively trying to become your friend and saying, oh, you're being oppressed and nobody hears you and whatever, and your headscarf is a good thing. You get onto it. And then you're like, and so all of these sort of started in academia, and the left started hoarding Muslims as their visual sign, just like they did during Bush, right? But much more aggressively now as a sign of identity politics. But then it came to like, so why do men and women pray separately in the mosque? You guys got to change that. Why are men prayers? You guys got to change that, right? You guys got to be for gay marriage. You got to be for this and that. It's like, and then Muslims are suddenly felt these people actually like them. And now people are like, do I say to my friends who've said how much they support me that, man, my religion actually makes me go do this, right? And,
See, this is what happens. This is so interesting, Cameron, because Carter's an atheist. He saw wokeism infiltrate atheism.
Wow. Yeah,
I'm now watching it infiltrate.
We died first, by the way, just to be clear.
Sam Harris, he's an example of that, right? The jerk atheist who's not about like, well, I don't believe any of this stuff. It's like, you can't believe any of this.
By the way, as a libertarian, you'll appreciate, I refer to atheists generally as state theists, because I don't think there are many actual atheists. I think 95% of the people who call themselves atheists are actually state theists. They worship the government instead of a god, and they have this secondhand value system that they gain through looking around and seeing what their friends support. And it's worse than any religion I can possibly imagine.
Well, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I've always called them the angry agnostics, right? They don't know what is true, but they just know they don't want to. They just know that they've got to put down this old system, right? That's it.
Well, this is so interesting to me because as we said, like it infiltrated atheism. Yeah. It's infiltrating Christianity. I did not realize it was infiltrating Islam in the United States, but that makes sense to me because the way that I've seen it operate and having been in it for so long is it it moves in and it basically consumes and then incorporates all these different movements. So it took over feminism and it incorporated feminism, so much so that if you're not down with everything that they're saying about how not just gender is a social construct, but now biological sex is a social construct, well, then you're going to get kicked out. And so all these old school, these third wave feminists, these radical feminists are now being told that or second wave feminists are being told that they're transphobic and that they're TERFs, and they're being pushed out of feminism, which is crazy.
J.K. Rowling has been the warrior against that.
Yes.
She ain't no conservative. She ain't no Trump-loving conservative. That's J.K. Rowling, and she's the enemy.
Yeah. It did the same thing with the LGBT movement. It co-opted it and pulled it in. It's doing it, it spreads in, and then it turns you, it's almost as a screenwriter, you could come up with some analogies for this, I'm sure.
It's the Borg from Star Trek. You will be assimilated.
I appreciate the Star Trek analogy. That was a good one. Yes.
It's parasitic.
Well, it does it to companies. It does it to organizations. It does it to other ideas. It's a meme in the Richard Dawkins sense of the word, not in the internet sense of the word meme. But it's an idea that's a virulent virus, and it infects everything, and it does what parasitic ideas do, which is subvert the goal of the host. And that could be Twitter or Christianity or feminism, right?
Well, there is a growing resistance within the American Muslim community, and it's mostly coming from people my age, like the Generation X, right? Who are like, hey man, we're not going down this direction. We're not gonna screw up our religion, man, because I'm gonna die one day, and I ain't gonna be answering to you, clown. And so, but unfortunately, the millennials are where it's really the problem, right? I've had intent, I've been part of a really interesting Muslim Jewish conversation group that's actually taken me to Israel several times, whatever. And interesting is I had better relations with the Jewish participants in the group, many of them who were very conservative, versus some of the Muslims who were very woke. They were the millennial Muslims. And the last meeting we had, we were sitting at a table, and our Jewish colleagues were asking, so how do you define who is a Muslim, right? They're telling us, you can be an atheist and still be a Jew, because in that tradition, it isn't necessarily about belief in God. It's a belief in the community, right? And that's cool. And that's how that tradition has worked. But in Islam, there's some set beliefs, like in Christianity, like you got to believe there's one God, you got to believe Muhammad is the last prophet. There's some set beliefs, right? And so I started saying that. I answered the question. I said, well, and I said, these are the basic beliefs of Islam. And I said, but now there's this whole trend, especially in Hollywood, where you have people like Aziz Ansari who were born in Muslim families who are now like, yeah, I'm an atheist, right? And again, whatever their philosophical belief is, it's certainly very helpful to be an ex-Muslim atheist in Hollywood, right? It's certainly not helpful to be a religious Muslim guy, right? We're all feeded, right? And so you've got that, fellow Pakistani Kumail Nanjiani who's like, well, I don't believe in God, but my parents are Muslim or whatever, and so they get promoted. And so I said, I actually don't believe anyone who says there is no God is a Muslim. I don't believe this ex-Muslim crap, because to me, that's a central definition. You don't believe in God, you're not a Muslim. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. You're still Pakistani, you're still Turkish, you're still this. You're just not a Muslim because you don't believe in God. It's like saying I don't believe in Christ, but I'm a Christian. It doesn't mean anything. Okay. So, and one of these woke millennials who is a teacher at the Islamic school here in LA, a teacher at the Islamic school, exploded at me saying, she literally said, don't you dare say that. You have no right to define who is a Muslim, right? Someone, if someone says they're Muslim, I accept it absolutely. I said, and this, our Jewish friends are listening to the fascinated. I was like, so someone who says there's no God is Muslim? She said, yes, if they say
just like Muslim. If someone says they're a woman, they're a woman. It's the same postmodern language construction.
But that's insane, because it's literally it's defined by
it's a belief. It's a religion.
It's defined by belief. Being Islam or being Christian is defined by a belief.
Exactly. And even being Jewish, like I say, you don't have to believe in God. You don't have to believe in Moses. But my Jewish friends believe that their community has a special purpose in this world, right? And you could be an atheist Jew and believe my community's values and traditions have a special purpose in this world. If you say, I believe the Jewish community is just average, nothing, whatever, most Jews are like, man, that's not really, you're sort of disassociating from the faith then, right? Because the community is the identity. And so I was shocked by this. And she was so angry and so vituperative that I became quiet. I said, okay, then, I'm just going to be quiet now because the woke don't let you speak, right? So I became quiet. And then so our Jewish friends were fascinated by this. And then they asked her, well, So how would you define a Muslim? And then before her woke program could come in, she said, well, they have to believe in one God and Muhammad is the last prophet and the Quran is this. And then she stopped herself because everyone started laughing because she said, and I said, well, you just said those, you got to believe that stuff.
Yeah.
But again, that's the war. That's the war that's happening. And she's a teacher at the Islamic school here in Pasadena.
Okay, this is insane because the same thing is happening. There are these Christian leaders who are now speaking wokeism, and it's the same thing happening, Cameron. I went to a lecture in Austin a year or two ago, and this is when I just started, when I had just become a Christian, and there was this author I wanted to hear. He wrote "You Are What You Love," James K. Smith. Anyway, so I was there to hear him speak, and he did this really interesting lecture about St. Augustine. And afterwards, during the Q&A, it was being held in this, I think it was an Episcopal church, and I didn't realize, but I learned it was a very woke church that it was being held in. And so during the Q&A, he was answering this question about Jesus being Christians believing, and Jesus is the way, the truth, the light. And he was sort of giving an analogy of if you're on a shore and, Jesus is the lifeboat that takes you to this other shore. Jesus is the boat. He's the method. He's the way to get there.
I think most Christians in history would agree with that.
Would agree with that, right? So one of the women who I attended that church, who was in the Q&A, she stood up and asked it, and she was very upset. And she said she identified herself as a member of the church we were all at, and said, I don't believe that. It's so closed-minded, and I believe there are many different boats that you can take to get to God.
You're a Unitarian. That's great, but you ain't that.
But she was trying to say she's a Christian, but she believes there are very different boats, and one of those boats could be Muhammad or Buddha or
Buddhism, and that's a perfectly valid way of thinking, but that's not traditional Christianity.
That's not Christianity, right? And this is the kicker of this story is that he pushed back with her. He was sort of saying, no, as a Christian, I believe there's the one boat. It's the Jesus boat. And then one of the priests at that church stood up in an authoritative fashion and identified himself as a priest there, a preacher there. And he said he just wanted to correct things. He was correcting the author and the speaker who was brought in to speak. So I just wanted to correct the record here. This lady who asked the question goes to our church, and I do agree with her. We believe that there are several different rafts to get to. And I was just sitting there because I was new to Christianity too, and I came to Christianity from wokeness, and I arrived. I kind of went on a journey for a while, figuring out what it is that I think, and I felt like God was pulling me towards Him, and I just couldn't understand. This was my first recognition that wokeness was in the Christian church because, and I didn't find it attractive. I'm like, I left wokeness for a reason. I didn't come to the Christian church for this.
It. It's like this, like it's like you said, it's the subversive thing. It's this virus gets into everything.
So in the pushback that's happening, as you said, there's some pushback happening, and it's mostly from Gen X, which is also not surprising to me. But why do you think it's coming from this generation, from Gen X?
Gen X, it's interesting because have you guys read the book, The Fourth Turning, which I know a lot of people have been talking about, right?
I haven't.
That was a book written about 20 years ago, which actually coined the terms Gen X and the millennials. It actually coined those terms 20 years ago, and it actually predicted someone like Trump. It says that basically the Fourth Turning is a book written by these historians who said there's 80-year cycles in American and European history, and that every 80 years there's a massive revolutionary change in the system. So you have the 1780s, which established the Constitution. 80 years later, you have the Civil War, 1860s, right? Then you have World War II in the 1940s. And then he predicted back in 2000 that by 2020, we're going to go through massive revolutionary change and potential breakup of the country, right? And he said there's going to be a dark horse political figure will arise that will be a catalyst for a lot of that. And so he predicted the character of Trump, right? And so it's a fascinating book. But The Fourth Turning, it actually says that throughout the history, whenever you have these fourth turnings, these generational turns, and the fourth one is always the revolutionary change, it's always this figure because he classifies the four generations, and we fall into essentially the third generation of the turn, the Generation X, right? And the fourth generation of the turn is the millennials, who are the people that screw everything up, and then the revolution happens, right? And he says that what's interesting is it's always a fight between the generation 2 and generation 4. Generation 2 is the baby boomers, and generation 4 is the millennials. You know, they're the ones at each other's throat, right? And they're the ones who are creating the conflict, and they're the ones creating all the political issues, right? And so the generation in between, generation 3, is always the forgotten generation. It's the one that's ignored, that had to become independent when they were kids. We were, latchkey kids. I grew up, my parents had to work. Yeah, I come home in Brooklyn at the age of 10. There's nobody home, and I'm making myself my lunch, right? We all know that. This generation don't know that. Like, dude, leave your kids alone at 10 years old, make their own food. I mean, oh my God. And so we grew up with this sense of being ignored by the world. Everyone was focused on the dumb baby boomers, right? And these kids hadn't been born yet. These troublemaking kids hadn't been born yet. And so we were the ignored generation. And so we learned self-sufficiency, and we just wanted to be left alone. He said, this generation just wants to be left alone because they were always left alone. And he said, this generation always has to be the one that challenges the chaos created by 2 and 4. He said, they're the ones that get you through. They're the ones that get you through the crisis created by the 2 narcissistic generations.
That's so interesting.
You should read The Fourth Turning, and I would put it on because it's amazing, because he predicted everything, and he predicted what's happening today with the breakdown of America. And he's not some right-wing guy; he's a historian, and they were saying this is what's going to happen. He said the third generation for us, Generation X, will be the ones that will have to rise up and solve the crisis created by Generation 2 and Generation 4. And then they will lead us into whatever the next reset of the country will be, and they're going to get exhausted by the process. He said they don't want to do it. They just want to be left alone. But they see these 2 narcissistic generation of clowns who are fighting it out, and they have to save the world they're living in.
That's amazing, because that to me describes Carter. Carter.
I'm flattered.
Stop, Carter. You're the reluctant hero.
He's the reluctant hero. He wants to be left alone. He doesn't want to be doing this.
I was like, I'm going to be as frank as possible. I came to Hollywood to meet hot girls and become famous, right? I'm the only one in history to ever have that agenda, I'm sure, right? I came here to meet hot actresses and become famous and go to Oscar parties. I did not come here for this crap. And just as I'm about to become famous, the whole world shuts down. And I'm like, great. And my spiritual teachers are like, well, Allah is protecting you from your own sinfulness. I was like, shut the whole planet down so I can't commit sin. Great.
That's a very positive way of looking at it, though. I think the Christians would look at it that way, too. You're being saved from something.
What you're saying comports with, have you ever read Sir John Glubb's Fate of Empires?
Oh, that's one of my favorite books. It's a great book, and he was also prescient.
I think, what is it, 2026 or something, is about the end of the empire by his...
Exactly. And he wrote in the 60s when the British Empire was collapsing, right? And he was a British military guy in Jordan. And so he saw the patterns. That book is great because it shows throughout history empires fall into a 250-year cycle, which fits perfectly with the fourth turning thesis, right? And empires rise and fall at 250 years. I really hope that America isn't done now. I really hope, because I do believe this country is special. And I think if this country becomes a woke communist nightmare,
wait, can I argue with you for a second? Because I feel that, Mr. Good. But if I really ask myself what matters about America, it's not the geography, it's not the particular configuration of the 50 states, it's the ideas behind it. And if the best way for those ideas to survive is that America as we know it breaks apart and the phoenix rises from the ashes of that, which is configured differently, but carries forward the ideas of the Enlightenment that America was founded upon, probably implemented better than at the founding of America, then that's a win for me. Well,
I hope. I mean, right now, I agree that is the spreading of these ideas is the purpose of America. I believe that, right? Whether we can do that when the whole planet is communist, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard. We already saw what happened.
The whole planet's not communist. Like, China's not communist. China's authoritarian.
Yeah.
We are actually communist.
Yes, we're communist. Yes, that's true. Gavin Newsom is more communist than Xi.
China's having parties. They're having New Year's.
I was just saying, Gavin Newsom is more communist than Xi Jinping.
Oh, absolutely. Because we saw New Year's Eve, everyone is partying in Beijing, and we're sitting here. Please give me my $600.
Yeah. By the way, you guys brought this up before. I know Southern California is also horrible. I was on, the app Neighbor, what's it called? Next Door. it's a crappy app with a bunch of Karens. I was on Nextdoor. I just looked on Nextdoor, and there's people complaining. Someone posted this thing in my neighborhood. Now, we're kind of, it's hard for me to say we're rural, but we're kind of rural. There's like not much around. There's hiking trails everywhere. This post was like, I can't believe people aren't wearing masks when they're out walking. How dare they? And I thought, oh, let's see the people pile on this. And I went into the comments, and it was just pages of agreement. And I thought, how is it, like, I have less in common with Californians than I do with Chinese, and I don't even speak Mandarin. At least people in China would be like, this is kind of ridiculous. Right? Like, they recognize the authoritarianism they're subject to, they resent it but do it anyway, and
They got no choice. My colleagues I worked with in Beijing were very open about the oppression that they had grown up under. They were very open about it. They were open about what Mao did to their society and Cultural Revolution. So I asked them, why don't you guys revolt? They're like, well, Mao took away all our guns.
No, we can't.
They said it. We don't have any guns. We can't revolt. Because it was a society that had rifles before. In the old Chinese Republic, Chiang Kai-shek, people were armed. And Mao made sure everyone got their arms out. And then, boom, once everyone's disarmed, Cultural Revolution died.
Wow. So what do you see as, I know this is a hard question to answer. We've been asked this question on other shows and stuff too. What do you see as some possible paths that we're going to take in 2021? Like, where is all of this leading? Is there a silver lining?
Well, look, as a person of faith, I do believe God is guiding, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Me too.
I would disagree with Carter on this. I do believe God has a destiny for this country in this physical locale. I believe, there's actually a wonderful book written by Manly Hall, who's a sort of traditional spiritual teacher for, cultist or whatever, Freemason, but he had a book called The Secret Destiny of America. And, you can believe it's all woo-woo occultist stuff about, how it all goes back to Akhenaten and the pharaohs. But what he established was the idea that this continent had been set aside by mystical forces to be a place of freedom. And that's why it was, aside from our beloved indigenous population that we wiped out, it was largely unpopulated when the Europeans came, right? And it was set aside for this spiritual purpose of being an experiment of freedom, which couldn't exist anywhere else. I believe that on a spiritual level. So I believe God is guiding this country, and in the same way that God saved this country in the 1770s, he saved it in the 1860s, he saved it against the Nazis in the 1940s. I believe God will save this country now. But in all those places, there was tremendous civil strife to achieve that salvation. We didn't get through the 1860s without a scratch, right? We didn't get through the 1940s without a scratch. I don't want this. Like I said, I'm Generation X. I just wanted to have fun, man, and get Emmys and go to parties. I don't want this crap. But now we're in this crap, right? Yeah. And so I do think the next 4 years, just like the fourth turning and just like Sir John Glubb said, right? It's going to be this chaotic period of revolutionary transformation. If Mr. Biden ultimately is inaugurated on January 20th, I say if, it looks like it's all happening, but I also think everything's crazy right now and anything can happen, right, in the next 2 weeks. If that's the case, I do think we're going to see an even worse lockdown under these great reset maniacs, right? But I also think people are done with it. I think people are done with it. And I think regrettably, the kind of unrest we saw in DC yesterday was the beginning. If we actually go further down the authoritarian path, there will be an uprising in this country. I don't want that. Like I said, I live in peace. I'm taking care of my mom. I already saw one crazy person can threaten my family, right? What if I got a lot of these crazy people? And what if I'm publicly identified as someone who at least isn't with a narrative? That's not a safe place to be if there's unrest. I do think we're going to go through unrest. I think we will come out of this returning to the Enlightenment values that Carter is talking about. But it's not going to be fun, and unfortunately, I think it's going to actually be bloody. I don't want that to be true, but I think that's what's going to happen.
We're on the same page.
Unfortunately,
I don't know what the unrest will look like, but the Democrats are going to use this stuff now that they've got control of all of Congress and the executive branch. I think they're going to use the unrest from yesterday and any potential, because there's crazy people on both sides. So obviously there will be Trumpers and right-wingers who will do horrible, crazy things, because that will happen. It happened on the left. We just don't talk about it. So,
they're heroes, Exactly. Idea, right?
But they're going to use this. They're going to use this to crack down on firearms, and they're going to use it for. I heard Fauci this morning recognizing, like, well, I know people are tired of the mandates, and he used this language of like, but any virus, potentially, this is what's needed. Like, he talked about, like, they're going to expand beyond COVID, and like they want authoritarian control, and they're going to use this. And if anything sparks that violence, I think it's going to be tightening of the fist, and some people are just going to not stand for it anymore.
Well, that's the thing. What I believe is this: I am of the opinion that the events of the virus were utilized by politicians to try to push Trump out. I'm not arguing that there is no virus. I'm not arguing that people are not dying from it. I certainly believe they saw it quickly as an opportunity to set things in motion to get Trump out, right? And then once they discovered how quickly people went along with it, like, I like this authoritarian crap. I ain't gonna get right? This is addictive.
Hey,
right?
we're ahead of
Why
schedule.
would Newsom ever give this up? Yeah, and I don't have to obey the rules because all these suckers like Newsom can disobey the rules, and there's still millions of people who go, I still trust him. I had a conversation with a friend of mine in Hollywood, major producer, who said, "Oh, Newsom apologized for the for the French Laundry. He apologized. He's a good guy." Fauci. I was like, dude, I mean, how can you accept this crap? He's like, he's a good guy. I was like, he's a good guy because you have money and you have everything delivered into your house, right? Because you're a rich Hollywood producer, right? But that's what's. This thing, now that they're addicted to it, and now that they think they've gotten Trump out of the way, they're going to keep clamping down. And now that we've seen these great reset, weirdos openly talking about their weirdo plans, they're going to do that. But I just believe, like, the idea of confiscating guns is never going to happen. The Second Amendment is there for a reason. If they actually try, people are already bursting, and it's amazing to me how American patriots have restrained themselves. It's amazing to me.
Amazing, yes.
But I think if Mr. Biden is ultimately inaugurated and they believe he cheated his way in, I believe he cheated his way in. And I didn't vote for Trump. I believe he cheated his way in. If they believe that, I think we are going to see the beginnings of an insurgency. It'll be small at first, and the more they crap down, we are going to see essentially 1776 with modern weaponry. And I don't want that, but they're too stupid to not try it.
They're too, and we seem to be on this trajectory. I was trying to write something this morning just to sort out my thoughts about yesterday. We seem to be on this trajectory, and a lot of us have been warning about it for 4 years. 4 years it's been, my wake-up call was seeing what happened in my tribe, my social justice tribe, after Trump was elected. Yeah. And my part of that wake-up call, there were lots of pieces to it, but part of that was seeing the rise of Antifa and the embrace of Antifa and the double standard, the way that the media and people in my tribe just sort of carried water for this violence and seemed to be pushing this idea that violence is okay when you agree with the ideology of the people committing it. And to me, I just was thinking, this isn't going to end well. Are you unable to see where this leads? Because if we start to say to normalize violence when it's conducted by people on the left, at some point the right is going to say, we're going to meet you tit for tat.
And the right is better armed, and the right, a lot of these guys are former military guys. They know tactics. It's not just, I got paid to go set fire to that 7-Eleven, right, by some mysterious clown who gave me a few $100, right? It's going to be guys who are like, yeah, I was in the special forces, and this is how we're going to take down that group. Like, you just don't want to activate those guys. You don't want to activate that dragon.
Yeah, although you know what's because I've talked to a lot of people in and tangential to that community. And something that's happened in a lot of those, let's just call them the high-speed tactical communities, it's the older guys who have the conservative values and or we'll say libertarian values, like who are those people that you're talking about. If this doesn't happen soon, they will all retire out and age out. And a lot of the younger people coming in do not have that same ideology. They are just there for a paycheck if they're the police, or they're just there for what, like, they don't have the same I'll just call it libertarian leaning ideology that we think of as predominant in the military. And that's a little bit scary to me, because it's totally conceivable to have a military full of authoritarian tools and
that's dangerous. And then you have the Chinese Communist military, right? But that's the thing is, again, this is the benefit of having religious faith. There's nothing rational in what I'm saying. I just intuit that it's true, that there's a divine hand guiding, even if it's a minority of those now with military training, to say we ain't going to put up with this. And I believe that there is this hand, because I believe if this country becomes Xi's China, the whole planet will be in chaos for a century.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
and this is something you and I can agree on, you being Muslim and me being Christian. I also believe that God's divine hand's guiding everything, even when we humans don't have the ability to understand it. And I know that just from my personal life. I know that just from, relatable, personal things where I have taken a couple of leaps of faith in the past 2 or 3 years where I feel like God is leading me to make a certain decision that scares me and I don't want to make it. And I fight it and I keep praying for a different answer. Like, I didn't like that one. Let me keep praying. And then when I finally just get over that and suck it up and get the courage to say, okay, I'm going to take this step that I don't want to take. And on the other side of it, every time so far, I've gotten a little bit, at least a greater degree of understanding of why I was.
Yeah, it makes sense afterwards. It doesn't make sense in the process. I think and it's just, I think there was that famous quote from the guy from Apple, which is, you got to connect the dots backwards. You can't connect the dots looking forward.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Well, that's keeping me going, because I didn't want the events of the last year to happen. Right? They ruined all of our lives. They ruined the planet. I know people under severe depression, right? I find her, she had her close friend's teenage child committed suicide this year over depression about lockdowns, right? This is a real thing. I mean, and people in Hollywood have no sympathy for any of this. They have no sympathy for and they couldn't care less, because they're all sitting at their homes getting the deliveries. They're running everything from Zoom, and the disconnect they have from my barber. My barber, who basically had to lose her business this year, and just as she was about to send her son to college, and now she's like, I'm going to pay for my son's college, right? My barbershop's been closed for 6 months because of Newsom, right? And I can't even cut hair outside, right? Now she's doing surreptitious, right? Going to people's house secretly, like secret hair cutting, right? Just to survive. This is horrific. And if I did not have a belief in a transcendent force of God guiding history forward, I don't know that I could get through this, what we're going through. I mean, I have to admire you, Carter, that you say you don't have that belief. And again, at some point, I'd love to deconstruct what you actually believe about the universe, but you obviously believe something. Otherwise you wouldn't have to get through this.
Honestly, it is a little bit difficult to get through. I mean, it's not easy, and I try and be realistic about. Look, I admire optimism, and I think there's a place for optimism, but also, empires fall, horrible things happen. Communism killed over 100 million people last century. For me, I think what it does is just drive me to act, because I'm like, okay, well, I really don't want this to happen. We've got to do something. I mean, what we're doing basically now is just talking about it, right? We're like trying to help wake people up. Keri's very passionate about pulling people out of social justice. I'm a little bit more passionate about like just opening people's eyes who are normies and say like, hey, look at what's going on here. Stand up, grow the balls to stand up and speak your mind, and stop worrying about how you're going to be seen by your peers, because in large part, as you said, it's not actually a majority of people, it's a vocal minority. And if in truth everyone just stood up and said what they honestly believe, social justice will be wiped out tomorrow.
Of course, absolutely. And this, I mean, that's how Marxism has taken over historically. It's always a vocal minority that is backed by some kind of shady financial origin, and it suppresses everybody else who's passive. In the current moment, I want to make a comment about, because like I said, I've been watching all the the Trump supporters and everything else, and there's this whole trust the plan movement or non-movement.
It's 5D
in the Trump
chess
supporting community. Yeah, it's 5D chess, and he's, it's just like, and Q and all this stuff. And there's people with machines that can see the future, and they planned it all out, but it never plays out the way they say it's going to play out. And I'm like, look, man, I'm into all. I study. I'm a mystic. I'm a Sufi mystic. I study all kinds of unusual things that don't make rational sense behind the forces of history, right? But at the same time, I got to look at what's happening here. I think if Mr. Biden is indeed inaugurated in on January 20th, if that's how this ultimately is, which it looks increasingly likely, then I think a lot of people in the Trump camp are going to be shattered because they were told that the military is going to intervene and the white hats and all this stuff and trust the plan, and they sat on their asses for the last year doing nothing while this great reset took over our lives. And I think that will be the wake-up call when they realize you put your faith in a story and you put your faith in a human being. And I think, Keri and I, as religious people, understand you can't put your faith in a human being.
Yes.
Right? And you can't put your faith in a politician.
Hey, well, I agree with that. You have to be religious.
They're not all knowing. And the idea is, what's also happened is people have created a religion around Q and all this other stuff so that they don't have to actually do the work. Well, I think we're about to be in a situation where you're going to have to do the work because I think the idol's about to fall. And now you're going to have to make it say, okay, the golden calf ain't there anymore. What are you going to do now?
That is so apt. It's reminding me of a sermon I heard recently. But yeah, you can't put your faith. The government's not going to save you. A man is not going to save you. A politician, any man. And I think you're
Islam. Anyone who seeks authority is unworthy of it. And so, even as he's not a politician, he's a businessman who sacrificed everything. I don't know if he sacrificed everything, but he's a businessman. I was like, anybody who wants the job don't deserve it.
Totally agree with that one.
That's really funny because we talk about this all the time. We have people on our show who will be like, Carter, you should run for office, and he's like, no. And the thing is, like, I think the people who would make better leaders don't want to do it and are not going.
Well, that's why I said Generation X. None of us want to be leaders, and we're going to be thrust in this position. We don't want this stupid job. The two people that want the job don't deserve it. The millennials and the baby boomers, they don't deserve the job. And they
my
want
platform, I think, would be vote for me, and I'll dismantle the office that you put me in because it probably shouldn't exist.
You go find your own power. Did you ever see The Life of Brian? Right?
Yeah.
And there's that great scene when the poor guy who's mistaken, he opens a window, he's naked, and there's 1,000 people outside screaming, the Messiah, right? And he's trying to get them all to snap out of him. He's like, you are all individuals. And they all scream out, you're all individuals. And one jerk goes, I'm not. So we're the I'm not guy. I'm not an individual.
Cameron, I am
wait.
happy
Before
you.
Since Keri wants to wind down, don't wind down yet.
We're not ending.
Are you winding?
I'm not winding down. I just am expressing gratitude.
Well, and like as a believer, I know God brought us together, and this is part of the waking up our reluctant I'm not an individual warriors is part of the process.
I mean, I think that's been the problem with libertarian-minded people for decades is it's like herding cats. They just want to all be left alone. And when you try and put them together, everyone is that guy that's like, I don't want to be a part of a movement. I'm an individual. Yeah. And it's like, well, eventually we're going to have to get together because at least we want to leave each other alone. And there's a large contingency, a powerful contingency of the population that doesn't want to leave us alone at all. And I always say that in a free society, communists are welcome to go have a little commune. You are free to have your commune, and whatever little rules you want in your commune, you guys can go do. We're free to not be in your commune, but the reverse isn't true. And we need to realize that the reverse isn't true. You're not going to be able to hide out in your bunker in the middle of nowhere and sit this one out. It's not going to happen.
No, and it's going to happen real fast. I think after January 20th, I think people are going to wake up to the reality of the world that we're in. And then it's going to accelerate. And that's why I think 2021 is going to be an explosive year. I don't believe ultimately authoritarian forces will win. I don't believe that from a religious level. I don't believe that from a student of history level. I think there is still the gumption of the American spirit that will not allow this to ultimately win. And the process ain't going to be fun.
I'll agree with that. Yeah. There's one thing I really want to ask you about that's just kind of silly, but you're very passionate about Pluto, which is odd.
You see that? That's the most random thing you would have found on my Twitter. You didn't notice all the beautiful supermodels I post on Twitter, Yeah, people text me like, people actually think like, I would like that, but my wife wouldn't like me liking that photo. So whatever. Okay, so
Well,
I'm very
I am a
passionate
nerd.
about Pluto because Pluto is the ninth planet. It is an example of this subversion of reality that we were subjected to by these weirdos. The self-appointed group of astronomers in Europe proclaimed a few years ago that Pluto is not a planet, right? And the only reason they gave is that if we include Pluto as a planet, then we might have to include this one and that one and that one. I was like, no, actually you don't, because Pluto, from a purely geophysical analysis, is a planet. All these other random objects in the Kuiper belt are not planets. They're essentially huge asteroids because they're not fully rounded. They don't have their own internal volcanic activity. They don't have the basic geological things that makes Pluto just like the other 9 planets. And the fact that I keep seeing there's only 8 planets last year, I had the great delight of being in Chile to see the solar eclipse, right? And yeah, and I saw it for the first time solar eclipse, went with the group and saw it in the desert in Chile, had some other interesting experiences there. I saw a UFO. We'll have that other conversation, maybe on another show. but aside from the UFO, we went to Chile has some of the most incredible observatories, right? And we went there, and the nice Chilean, woman who was our guide at the observatory was talking about the 8 planets. And I kept being that I'm not an individual jerk in the crowd. They were saying there's 9 planets. I was that guy. I was like, every time she
Wait, so how do you tie this to the social justice? Like, you're tying this to the same woke virus.
It's a reality. I mean, Pluto is objectively a planet. It has always been objectively a planet by any scientific standard, and they just redefined it using words. That's the woke movement.
That's interesting. I didn't know enough about this. This is one of these things I haven't had time to look into, and I was like, oh, I guess it's not a planet, and didn't pay attention.
It is 100%. NASA, thankfully, has said it's still a planet, but we can't get
really? NASA is saying it's a planet?
Go along with it. NASA, the head of NASA, said it last year. He said it. He said at least personally. He said, I believe Pluto to be a planet because geothermically it's a planet, right? And he says, but it's not. NASA has not, I think, taken any official position on it. But the head of NASA has said it because he's just like But the fact that we have to fight over Pluto, we can't just say a planet is a planet because some random millennial jerk decided to redefine the word.
Now they're redefining 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4 anymore. I'm sure you've seen that nonsense happening.
All of this is done, and all of this is being done to destroy our youth, particularly minority youth. They're all like, well, children, again, the woke racism, black children need to have the flexibility to have 2 + 2 = 5. It's racist for them to not see it that way. I was like, you're trying to keep these people down. That's what Malcolm X said. You want them uneducated. Malcolm X, when he was in prison and he had his spiritual conversion, he went and he memorized the entire dictionary while in prison. That's why he's such an incredible orator. He was not an incredible orator. He became that. He, in prison, had suddenly found God, and he memorized the dictionary. And that's why he became one of the greatest orators of all time. And he said, we have to push the black community to the highest level of education because the white man don't want it for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't want it. They want us ignorant.
Can you recommend, what's your favorite Malcolm X biography?
Well, I think the autobiography of Malcolm X, by Alex Haley is the best. But I would also watch the movie Malcolm X by Spike Lee, which is, I think, one of the greatest movies actually ever made. I think it's up there with Lawrence of Arabia. It's incredible, and it is. I actually dragged when it came out in like 1992 or whatever. I was in college. I dragged a very right-wing friend of mine who assumed Malcolm X was a Che Guevara left-wing revolutionary, which is the nonsense, because he was actually a very conservative religious guy. And I dragged him to see the movie, and he watches this guy's and in Spike Lee movie, he's like, this guy's a religious conservative. He's talking about keeping families together. He's talking about don't drink. He's talking black community, don't use drugs. Don't, keep your family together. Your father's got to be the head of the household. And, and there's this wonderful moment in Spike Lee's movie, which is the genius of him as a filmmaker, where near the very end, where Malcolm knows, he was assassinated by members of Nation of Islam because he left the group and he just associated with their racial teachings, and he was assassinated by them. And he sort of sensed that murder was coming. And so essentially the day before he was killed, he calls his wife on the phone, Betty Shabazz, who I had the honor to meet once, and and he had beautiful little daughters. He called and he had this movie shows him having this very emotional conversation with her, how much he loves her because he knows he's going to die soon. Someone's going to kill him, and he's saying this and having this very romantic conversation on the phone, right? And then suddenly, out of nowhere, Spike cuts to the FBI is listening in. You've never seen it before in the whole movie. The FBI is listening in. The FBI is laughing. They literally said, "This guy's a monk compared to Martin Luther King. This guy's committed to his wife. What a joke! They're laughing at him. King's out there having orgies."
Yeah.
but I would watch the Spike Lee movie. It changed my life.
I've seen it, but it was so long ago. I am going to go watch it now.
Watch it again. And now from your new perspective, as someone who's had a spiritual awakening, has found God in this new way, you will understand him more.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you so much. I definitely want to talk to you again, whether on camera or off camera. I'm so happy to have met you.
Nobody wants to talk to me. I got nobody calling me saying, I want to hire you for this job. So might as well you and I talk. Right?
Well, I'm sure you know some of the non-woke actors and people on Twitter, because Gina Carano, but I'm so encouraged because we're starting to meet more people in the arts. My friend Clifton Duncan, who's an actor, did an interview with us. We got to talk to Mark Pellegrino, and we're just starting to find and identify and more artists who were either never fearful or have gotten over that fear and are just speaking truth or searching for truth, and that's really encouraging. So.
It's a process. The arts are going to be the last part of it. I mean, Hollywood's going to cling to this nonsense to the very end, and eventually it will figure out, its bread isn't buttered there, and people are just going to walk away.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, it's a great time for disruption in Hollywood. That the cost of producing movies has drastically fallen over the past couple decades.
Yeah.
And so maybe it's time for a little bit of disruption in Hollywood. Maybe Hollywood doesn't need to be in Hollywood moving forward.
There's going to be a change like the 70s. We're going to see a lot of smaller filmmakers, and people like Scorsese, all those guys were nobodies. They weren't part of the Hollywood system in the 70s. George Lucas, Coppola, they were all independent weirdos who made these films that were very different from what had been done before because of the social change that happened in the late 60s, early 70s. We're going to go through that as well in Hollywood. We're going to have a whole new generation of filmmakers that are going to take advantage of what you're talking about, and it'll be a good thing.
Well,
all good. And maybe we'll have
nice.
That'll be nice.
Yeah, and maybe Star Wars will be resurrected in a way that's good. By the way, just so you don't, I know you're passionate about Star Wars. I didn't even watch the final one because the last three movies. I watched the first, I watched the second, and the last. I didn't even watch the last movie because I was so concerned.
I gave up. I gave up after Last Jedi. I didn't watch Solo. I actually refused to subscribe to Disney Plus until I heard that Luke Skywalker had come back in a respectful way. Then I subscribed and I've been watching The Mandalorian.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Which is a good show.
I never ever thought I would come to a point in my life where I would abandon Star Wars, but I did.
Well, it's Jon Favreau really loves Star Wars. He's a fan. He's not coming from political ideology. He wants to make the fans happy, and he's very politically savvy. So he keeps a few little woke things here and there just to make sure his enemies don't come out directly to him, but he's easing it off back to real Star Wars. And this last thing with Luke Skywalker returning as a warrior was his, okay, I'm ready to take off the cloak and reveal who I really am because I'm trying to save Star Wars. And I think he's going to succeed. Cool. Well, thank you both for having me on.
Thank you so much, Kamran. And just remind people where they can find you online. We're going to put all this in the description. Yeah. But if people want to connect with you, where do they find you?
Which is where I post my politics, religious beliefs, and often pictures of beautiful women. If you can't handle that, deal with it. My Twitter is my name, Kamran Pasha, KamranPasha. I also have a website, which is KamranPasha.com, where I have a blog. I used to write for the Huffington Post. They no longer have me writing for them, but I used to write for the Huffington Post, and all my blogs from the Huffington Post are there. You can read some of my comments on politics and religion. And I also have my novels are available. I can just show you I have 2 novels published, like Simon Schuster. One is this book, Mother of the Believers, which is about the birth of Islam from the point of view of the prophet's wife. So it's a very interesting book, and very proud of it. And the second one is Shadow of the Swords, which is about the Third Crusade between Richard the Lionheart and the Muslim king Saladin. And so, really had the crusade sold from a Muslim point of view. And so those books, if you want to read them, I think they're pretty good. And they're available through my website or through Amazon.
Great. Thank you again for joining, Kamran.
What an honor.
Thanks for watching. If you're new to the channel, we have a deep content library that includes interviews with everyone from Mike Cernovich to Megan Murphy, so go check it out. If you'd like to see more, please consider supporting the show by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on all the major social media platforms, at least for now, and you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space chat on Telegram. See you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production has not been authorized by the Cathedral. Pay no attention to it. For your protection, the following co-conspirators have been unpersoned and marked for cancellation.
大家好，
Welcome to Very American Social Credit System.
祝好运。
Here's a fun fact. Voting incorrectly is now considered a willful act of sedition. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Did you know that research indicates that humans are the only species who prefer captivity? Computer voice Curtis. Never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.